Welcome, 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 everyone. My name is Ravi Cadesia. I am one of the members of Virupa Academia. I'm a professor at Temple University here in Philadelphia, and we're so excited to be welcoming you to our first of our spring semester talks. This is a series of talks that we have around the theme of traditions and transition. So we have our speakers that we're lining up should be talking about all sorts of the ways that traditions change and morph over time, that texts can be read through multiple traditions, that even how are traditions being maintained in the age of AI. So we'll have a lot of interesting talks, and I can't think of a better person to start this out with who's going to be talking about such a pivotal and interesting transitional figure and doing some of the research that really speaks to what we're hoping to have done and to speak about here at Virupa Academia. So to introduce our speaker for today, Westin Harris, I'd like to have Danilo, another member of Virupa Academia, to kind of tell us a little bit about our speaker and what we're going to hear about. So please, Danilo, take us away.
Thank you very much. So our guest tonight today is Dr. Westin Harris, also Yogi Singhanath, who has just completed his PhD in the study of religion at the University of California and who is now serving a postdoctoral residency at the Rubin Museum of Himalayan Art as their resident scholar in Himalayan cultures. So in this dissertation he just did for his PhD, the Vignettes of Virūpa, Writing and Reading a Siddha Across Traditions. He blends text critical, art historical, and ethnographic research methods to interrogate this Siddha Virupa as a literary character throughout all the literature pertaining to him found in India, Nepal, and Tibet, so as to investigate this deeply dialogical relationship between Buddhist and Śaiva-Śākta traditions. So, as he says in his dissertation, the figure of Mahasiddha Virupa becomes a sign of Shaivaness within Buddhist circles and a sign of Buddhistness in Shaiva circles. And so we welcome him, who just spent over a decade living in South Asia, investigating these ethnographic records in Odisha and Konkana region in Western India and in Nepal. And we're very excited to have you share with us your findings.
Excellent. Thank you, Ravi G. Thank you, Danilo G. And also thank you to Acharya Ji, Acharya Timasina Ji, and the Vimarsha Foundation for hosting me this morning. It's a very sort of nice full circle moment. Danilo and I had some time, got to spend some time together in Nepal over the summer, so it's nice to be reconnected, albeit digitally. Please allow me just one moment to share my screen here. Okay, can everybody see the slideshow? Perfect. Okay. As we mentioned today, my talk is entitled Virupa Across Traditions, Siddha Stories at the Intersection of Buddhism and Shaivism. And as Ravi and Danilo mentioned, I will be presenting a lot of my dissertation research over the last decade of doing doctoral research on Virupa. Bear with me, there will be quite a bit of sort of talky talk for the first maybe 3 quarters, and then to reward you, excuse me, for sitting through all the talky talk, I've got some show and tell with a bunch of images and art, and so hopefully it will encourage you to sit through all of my blah blah. Speaking of the blah blah, I'd like to start with a bit of a story just to kind of set the mood here with Virupa. According to legend, long ago, a Buddhist monk named Sri Dharmapala, or protector of the doctrine, rises to prominence within the Mahaviharas of medieval East India. However, the higher he ascends the monastic bureaucratic ladder, the more scandalous rumors begin to plague his tenure. Some say he smuggles meat and alcohol into his private quarters, while others whisper of late-night rendezvous with local barmaids and prostitutes. Defrocked and expelled from the monastery for his purported transgressions, the monk dons the loincloth of a tantric ascetic and adopts the self-deprecating name Virupa, meaning ugly or misshapen. But unbeknownst to the monastic establishment, this miscreant is actually a fully perfected tantric adept, or siddha. And now unshackled from the fetters of monastic discipline, the siddha leverages the full thrust of his thaumaturgical might in service of Buddhist causes like charity and nonviolence. Like an Indian Moses, he splits the Ganga River to offer unfathomable riches to a lowly boatman. With a mere wag of his finger, he suspends the sun in the sky for 3 days to coax a local king into paying his exorbitant beer tab, transforming the humble tavern girl into a wealthy heiress in the process. In order to dissuade local populations from making animal sacrifices, he splits the Shiva Linga at Bhimeshwara in Draksharama, that's in Andhra Pradesh, simply by bowing. And he similarly subdues icons of Mahadeva in Hampi and Chandika in East India. In fact, the Siddha is so successful in his fierce methods of compassion, a compassionate subjugation, that the Bodhisattva of compassion, Avalokiteshvara, eventually intervenes, celebrating Virupa's prowess, but urging him towards slightly gentler methods. This is just a brief sort of vignette and introduction into some of the earliest hagiographical accounts of this figure known as Virupa, also known as Virūpākṣa, meaning something like odd-eyed. This figure is a Siddha, or an adept, revered in several still surviving Tibetan Buddhist and Nāth lineages, as well as in several Śaiva-Śākta, Virashaiva, Vaishnava, Mahananubhava traditions, a number of different South Asian and Central Asian religious traditions revere Virupa. As a result, this figure enjoys a vast hagiographical corpus across India, Nepal, Mongolia, etc. And in the course of my dissertation work, I've consulted over 50 hagiographical works in both classical and vernacular languages. So we're working with a rather sprawling corpus here. You'll notice here, just to kind of set the tone of Virupa across traditions, on the left side here, I have one of my favorite images of Virupa from the Kala Pustaka in the Cambridge University Library. It's an illuminated manuscript, and it combines images like from the Ramayana and a number of different subjects, but in it we have a very hybrid kind of Buddhist Nāth grouping of siddhas, and so here we have a beautiful Nepali or Newa style image of Virupa, and I especially like it because not only do we have Virupa's name inscribed beneath, but we also have the name of the tavern girl, Shaundini. So it's a relatively rare image. This, unfortunately, will be the last image we will see for the next maybe 30, 40 minutes, but as I promised, there will be lots of images at the end, so stay tuned. So, with a few exceptions, the Virupa corpus compromises two parallel narrative streams, and this is really kind of the thrust of the issue that we'll get into the kind of nitty-gritty around how to interpret these two narrative streams. So, these two parallel narrative streams are deeply intertwined and interdependent, but still generally discernible across the narrative corpus. From the earliest narratives, especially Tibetan sources from the 12th century onward, Virupa is depicted as a fallen Kshatriya monk expelled from the monastery for engaging in tantric transgressions. That's the version of the story that I read this sort of vignette at the beginning of the talk. I refer to this stream of Virupa narratives as the fallen monk type Virupa narrative. From later sources, especially from South Asia, from the 14th century onward, we see Virupa depicted as a fallen Brahmin priest expelled from his caste status due to engaging in great sins, especially maternal incest, but also like drinking alcohol, killing a Brahmin, killing a cow, eating meat, etc. But the emphasis is really on maternal incest. I refer to these as fallen Brahmin type Virupa narratives. Now, seeking to clarify the relationship between these two narrative streams, I explore three literary historical case examples to advance three major arguments. So those arguments and case examples are: the first, Virupa, I present or I read Virupa as a unified literary character. Now, I will unpack all of these, but I'll first just kind of go over them. So I read Virupa as a literary character, unified literary character, whom I call the Siddha Virupa character. I know it's not very imaginative, but at least it is descriptive. So in this way, I resist the urge to reduce hagiography to historicity. I'll unpack what that means in a moment. And I do this largely recognizing the didactic and rhetorical function of narratives. To reduce hagiographical narratives to just being about whether it historically happened or not, I feel like flattens and overlooks a lot of the didactic and rhetorical value of these stories. And as reading him as this unified literary character, I really problematize or maybe contextualize the two Virupas argument that really defines traditional and academic notions of Virupa right now. Again, I will unpack all of this for you, so bear with me. My second major argument is I present and read Virupa as a cross-sectarian figure. And this is really the emphasis of the talk today. So I emphasize Virupa's conspicuous hybridity. And as Danilo mentioned, I describe how Virupa indexes Shaivaness in Buddhist sources and Buddhistness in non-Buddhist sources or in Shaiva sources. And in this way, he's able to articulate complex histories of interreligious dialogue between Buddhists and non-Buddhists, especially between Buddhists and Nāths. My third major argument in my dissertation, which I will cover a little bit in this talk, but is less of an emphasis today, is this notion of Virupa as a space and placemaker. From the earliest sources, we see a persistent association with travel and pilgrimage, and so Virupa is often invoked to tell stories about specific places and spaces and networks. And many of the sites emphasized are often important nexuses of Buddhist-Shaiva exchange, and many of them are even sites of Virupa narrative production in their own right. So there is a kind of continuity even across the vast geographical expanses. We see this same sort of cartographic geographical theme play out. So these are my three main arguments. The three major case examples that I explore. So I read Virupa's vast Indian, Nepalese, and Tibetan hagiographical corpus in conversation with three major literary historical case examples. The first one being Odisha in southeast India. I look at a particular Odia, 16th, 17th century Odia text called the Goreka Samhita. My second literary historical case example is the Konkan region of southwest India. There I take as my sort of major the literary lens the Kadali Manjunatha Mahatmya, or the Greatness of Kadri Manjunatha, which is a 17th century Sanskrit text. And then finally, my third literary historical case example is the Kathmandu Valley of Nepal. And in this particular case, since the Buddhist Nāth and Buddhist Śaiva dialogue is still ongoing in the Nepal Valley or the Kathmandu Valley of Nepal, in this example, we actually have, instead of just one source, we have multiple sources. So we have a non-Buddhist stream of text and a Buddhist stream of text, but they are deeply dialogic and intertwined. The major non-Buddhist source I take from my literary lens is the Virūpākṣa Tirthayatra, which is a Sanskrit, 17th century Sanskrit text, part of the Himavat Khanda. And the Buddhist, major Buddhist text I look at is the Virūpākṣa Katha, an 18th century Newa text, as well as the Nepalika Bhumsa Bamshavali, that is the Chronicle of the Kings of Nepal, a 19th century Nepali text. So we're looking across classical vernacular texts, across regions, across languages, across time periods, right? We're doing a lot of that translational work, as Ravi mentioned in the introduction. So, as I said, I would unpack these for you. So this is a little bit more of the blah blah. Bear with me for those technical folks in the audience. This might be interesting. Otherwise, I promise I'll get to good stories in just a moment for the rest of you who are here for the stories. So rather than reducing hagiography to historicity, I read Virupa's hagiographies as didactic and rhetorical media, more reflective of the communities who produce them than of some supposed historical persons or historical Virupa figure. Now, don't get me wrong, one or more historical Virupas probably did exist. I'm not here to problematize that aspect, but I am more interested in the ways that Virupa is represented and continually be remembered in the stories, images, and religious practices of the communities that revere him. Hence, I'm reading Virupa as a literary character. And in doing so, I deploy Black and Genes, four characteristics of a literary character. So these four characteristics are stability, that is the recognizability of a character despite appearing in different contexts. The flexibility, that is a character's adaptability to local concerns of different communities. Their intertextuality, which is the use of characters, themes, and motifs from other texts or across multiple texts. And demonstrability, a character's ability to demonstrate particular ideas or positions, theological, social, hierarchical, etc. So in this way, I suggest that the Virupa character of both the fallen monk and the fallen Brahmin type stories, remember these are the two major categories of stories that we see across this vast corpus. So I argue that both of these two different narrative types, the fallen monk and fallen Brahmin stories, ought to be read as singular literary characters, as a singular literary character based on a shared repertoire of narrative topoi. And in this regard, I problematize what I call the two Virupas argument. So, what is the two Virupas argument? In the late medieval period, Tibetan Buddhist exegetes begin to differentiate, or maybe not late medieval, maybe that's a little harsh. In the medieval period, Tibetan Buddhist exegetes begin to differentiate between two supposedly distinct historical Virupas, okay? They claim that the narratological distinction between the fallen monk and the fallen Brahmin type Virupa stories is due to a historical distinction between two historical Virupas. That's the claim. I'll unpack that claim a little bit further. This is according to them. So, according to them, there is an elder Virupa who is the Kshatriya monk, and this elder Virupa is associated with the fallen monk type stories. He's also known as Sri Dharmapala. He's associated with the Rakta Yamari and Lamdre cycles or teachings, especially within the Sakya school of Tibetan Buddhism. And he is identified with the sun stopping, Ganga reversing, linga splitting narrative episodes that I sort of read that vignette from in the beginning. According to this two Virupas argument, the second Virupa is the younger Virupa, which they associate with the fallen Brahmin type stories. This younger Virupa is also known as Virūpākṣa, or Black Virupa, or Brahmin Virupa, Brahmse Birwapa. And this Virupa is associated with the Vajrayogini cycle, especially Chinnamasta Vajrayogini, and the Amrita Siddhi or Hatha Yoga teachings, and especially associated with the Shangpa Kagyu, Marpa Kagyu, and Shije schools of Tibetan Buddhism. And this figure is identified with the great sinner narrative episode, especially that maternal incest topoi that I mentioned before. So this is the two Virupas argument that largely defines both traditional and academic notions of Virupa to this day. And this is the major sort of model that I am problematizing in my dissertation and in this talk today. So this two Virupas, as I mentioned, this two Virupas model largely shapes both traditional and academic conceptions of Virupa today. Simply put, the Virupa corpus available to us today simply cannot be neatly bifurcated along these neat sectarian lines. It just can't. That's just the simple fact of it. So here are a few brief examples. If you would like a thoroughgoing treatment of, or refutation, or problematization, or maybe contextualization of the two Virupas argument, I refer you to the introduction to my dissertation. But just very, very briefly, I don't want to get too lost in the weeds here, but I'll just cover just very briefly a few reasons why this two Virupas argument is just simply untenable from a broader perspective. So recently, a colleague, Kurt Kutzer, and I have been working on a manuscript collection that it is from the tradition known as the Six Varahi Scriptures. This is the tradition that has the Chinnamasta Vajrayogini lineage. Comes from Lakshmankara, the Siddha Lakshmankara to Virupa. And in this collection, we have what is possibly likely the earliest Virupa hagiography. Remember, the Chinnamasta Vajrayogini is usually a form of Virupa, is usually the one associated with the younger Virupa. And in this manuscript collection, which may have the oldest extant Virupa hagiography, this Virupa is presented as the Ganga stopping, sun stopping, Ganga reversing, linga splitting Virupa that is otherwise associated with the elder Virupa. So this very early collection problematizes that. The Rakta Yamari Tantra itself problematizes this. Remember, according to the two Virupas argument, the Rakta Yamari cycle is usually associated with the elder Virupa. Yet if you actually read the prophecy in the Tantra about Virupa, he's called Virūpākṣa of Virūpākṣa and is identified as a Brahmin, which would align with the Brahmin Virupa or the younger Virupa according to that two Virupas argument. There's also this very important text called the by Shariputra, the a Buddhist abbot of Vajrasana, a relatively late Buddhist figure in South Asia. He writes a text called the Virūpākṣa Vikata, and this is a life story, a hagiography of Virupa. He's called Sri Dharmapala. We have all of these familiar aspects associated with elder Virupa, but he's also associated with the Chinnamasta Vajrayogini tradition, etc. And even the proponents of the two Virupas argument themselves, like Jamyang Khyentse Wangchuk, like Taranatha, etc., they even disagree over what distinguishes one Virupa from the other in the first place. So even if you take the proponents of this two Virupas argument at face value, their different arguments don't even line up either. Again, that's just a very brief overlook. I don't want to get too lost in that. You can refer to my dissertation to dive into that more. So I'm not here to say that the two Virupas model is fundamentally wrong or inauthentic from a practitioner's perspective, but just that it is born out of the theological and sectarian concerns specific to Tibet, including, or most specifically, a desire to disentangle and distinguish different Tibetan Buddhist schools and lineages claiming connection to Virupa. So it is a specifically Tibetan argument, and that's why it just simply doesn't map on to the broader hagiographical corpus beyond Tibet. Instead, I read Virupa's transformation from fallen monk to fallen Brahmin as a narratological and rhetorical response to shifting socio-religious concerns in South Asia, especially following the decline of Buddhist monastic institutions on the subcontinent. So put briefly, the notion of a fallen monk lost some of its salience over time in South Asia because of the decline of the monastic tradition, and so the notion of transforming this Virupa character into a fallen Brahmin was a more sort of socially salient way of constructing the story in the absence or in the decline of this monastic institution. But we can see similar sort of narrative topoi and themes, right? This notion of transgression and being expelled from some kind of priestly status, whether you being a monk or your Brahmin caste status. So we can see that they're kind of two different manifestations of similar ideas. So in the Buddhist narratives from the earliest strata, Virupa is routinely so we're going to get into now some of this cross-sectarian aspect, right? So in the Buddhist narratives from the earliest strata, Virupa is routinely associated with Shiva. Even the names Virupa and Virūpākṣa are well-known epithets of Shiva, especially in his famous erotic ascetic forms, as seen in certain narratives like the Pine Forest narrative and his game of strip dice with Parvati, etc. So it is often in these very erotic ascetic kind of stories that we see Shiva called Virupa and Virūpākṣa, and sure enough, we see a lot of those same themes come through in the Virupa hagiographies. So some quick examples of Shaiva, or not quite Shaiva, but Shiva associations across various Buddhist narratives. We see in Abhayadatta Shri's Tales of the 84 Siddhas, we see Virupa identified as Shiva's elder brother. He says, oh, I can't prostrate to the linga because elder brothers don't bow to their younger brothers, right? So there is a kind of a kinship affinity here. Later in that same story, Shiva manifests at a miraculous city to worship and praise Virupa. In another set of texts, these are the Logyu, for example, of Drakpa Gyaltsen and Pakmadrupa, we see Virupa likened unto Mahadeva when meditating in Varanasi. They say, is he a Buddhist? Is he a Brahmin? Or is he Shiva himself? Because he's sitting in the forest meditating in such a sort of rigorous ascetic way. Later in those same texts, he uses ornate Sanskrit to flatter a Deccan king, being appointed head priest of the Bhimeshwara Shiva temple temple in Andhra, where he oversees 500 dreadlocked Shaiva sadhus. Eventually, he loses that position in a sort of series of comedic ways. But the fact is at least for a while, he was perfectly content to be the abbot of this community of Shaiva ascetics and be the main priest at this Shiva temple. And finally, later, he splits that same Bhimeshwara linga because the king finds out that he's a Buddhist and says, "Oh, you must bow to this to prove that you're not a Buddhist." And he goes, "Dude, I don't think your God can handle it, but sure." And he apologizes to Shiva beforehand. He says, "Look, I'm sorry, but this king's making me do it, so I got to do it." But he fixes the linga afterwards and puts a stupa or an image of Avalokiteshvara on top. And he later goes, in those same texts, he later goes to subdue another Mahadeva site, which in the Tibetan sources is identified as Hampa Hasaja or Tampa Pratima. Now, I've included a small little image at the bottom here to show the similarities of the orthography of the letters T and H in the Tibetan texts. So I am arguing here that this Tampa Pratima is probably a Tibetan a corruption of Hampapati, which comes from Pampapati. Pampa is the major goddess of the Virūpākṣa Hampi site, and so the Virūpākṣa Shiva temple in Hampi is often called Pampapati because he is the husband of Pampa, the local goddess. And so I argue that this story of Virupa going to this place, this Mahadeva site called Hampa Hasaja or Tampa Pratima is Hampapati or Pampapati, that is Hampi, the Virūpākṣa temple in Hampi. So continuing the cross-sectarian themes, many of the specific lineages associated with Virupa are Buddhist lineages that later get taken up into Śaiva-Śākta traditions, at least 4 of which later become Mahavidyas in the Dasa Mahavidya tradition. So we have the Chinnamasta Vajrayogini tradition. I've listed a number of sources, both Buddhist and Śaiva or Śaiva-Śākta. Beneath each of these, I will be sharing these slides afterwards, so I won't go into all of this, but anyone who wants to follow up on these leads, you can note these references and follow up on them later. So we have the Chinnamasta Vajrayogini tradition. Obviously, Chinnamasta becomes a very popular Śaiva-Śākta deity. We have Ugratara Vajrayogini. We have Mahakali and Mahakala. The Mahakali tradition in Tibetan Buddhism is known as Palden Lama Dudsalma, or the smoke-clad Sri Devi Dumangari or Sri Devi Dumavati. So we have the Mahakali connection. We have the Dumangari or Dumavati connection. We also have this association with Yamari and Yamantaka, which also get taken up into Śaiva-Śākta traditions. And we also have the Amrita Siddhi and Hatha Yoga teachings. So these are all traditions associated directly with Virupa, and all of which share some kind of cross-sectarian valences. So it's also worth noting on this cross-sectarian theme that the corpus contains several Virupa stories written by Buddhists who had Nāth gurus. So, for example, we have Shariputra, this abbot of Vajrasana that I mentioned earlier, 14th century abbot of Vajrasana, who compiles that Virūpākṣa text, and he was a Buddhist with a Nāth guru named Golenatha. And then, of course, we have Taranatha, the great Jonang polymath, who was a disciple of Buddhagupta Natha of the Natheshwari Panth. That will be important for later when we come back to Nepal. The Virupa stories seem to be most prominent in places with history of intimate Buddhist, non-Buddhist dialogue, especially Buddhist Nāth dialogue. So we see this in Odisha, where many Nāth mutts were built on or near the ruins of Buddhist viharas, and also near major Shaiva and Vaishnava sites like the Lingaraj temple and the Jagannatha temples. We see this in the Konkan region of southwest India. Sites like the caves of Panhali Kaji and the Kaji Manjunatha temple show a direct continuity between Buddhist and Nāth occupation, and we see this play out in the Kathmandu Valley, where to this day Nāths remain in deep dialogue with Buddhists even today. So let's look at my case examples here. So the first is an Odia Oedipus, Virupaksha in the Goreka Samhita. So even from the earliest synoptic Tibetan sources, the Siddha Virupa character has a strong association with the Deccan, that is South India. Routinely in the text, he's said as going to Dakinipata or Dakshinapata, that is the Deccan, South India. The what I call the synoptic Tibetan sources. These are those early Tibetan sources that all kind of present a relatively similar picture. So in these synoptic Tibetan accounts, is frequently, these synoptic Tibetan accounts frequently identify Odivisha or Odisha as the site of Virupa's iconic sun-stopping tavern episode. So as I said before, many of the sites that produce Virupa texts are also mentioned in Virupa texts or Virupa stories themselves. So we see this in the case of Odisha as a very important site in the earliest strata of Virupa narratives. So from Odisha, we have this text called the Goreka Samhita, which was a single manuscript collected by the late great Bansidhar Mohanty at a site called the Kolangiri Mutt, which is a Nāth Mutta in a village of householder Joginathas at the base of Kolangiri Hill. Kolangiri Hill was the site of a historical Buddhist vihara. So again, we see at these locations this continuity between Buddhist and Nāth occupation. This text that was composed, or at least maybe not composed, but at least discovered at this Nāth Mutt, is an Odia language text. It is a 16th century, identifies itself as a Shloka Gita, attributed to one Chandrasekhara Natha, who was almost certainly an initiated Nāth. Approximately 1600 verses of rhyming couplets, and as a Shloka Gita, it's meant to be sung, and in this way is vaguely reminiscent of Buddhist dohas and charyagitis, especially in this kind of rhyming couplet kind of way. I'm not necessarily positing a direct connection necessarily with the Buddhist dohas, but just that we see this continuity of this kind of vernacular Siddha couplet style, though there may be some sort of direct continuity, I'm not sure. So the text is framed as a discourse between the Siddha Haripa, that is Jalandhara, and Gobinda Chandra or Gopi Chand in Uttara Koshala. And so the text covers a wide range of topics interesting to Nāths. So we have cosmogony, theogony, that is the creation of the cosmos, creation of the gods, yogic philosophy, speculations on the yogic subtle body, mantras, lineage lists, and especially stories of Siddhas like Goraknath, Matsyendranath, Chaurangi, and Virūpākṣa. This is perhaps the earliest work of Nāth self-representation that is attributed to a Nāth author to describe key Nāth symbols and practices that still largely define Nāthness today, like the ear-cutting initiation, the use of the word Adesh as a homage, the enumeration of the 12 panths, etc. So this is likely the earliest work of Nāth self-representation that talks about these sort of key sartorial and sectarian markers of Nāthness. So it is a thoroughgoing Nāth text. So in this text, it devotes basically the final third of the entire text to talking about Virūpākṣa. So he's very important in this text. And according to this text, Virūpākṣa is born of a Brahmin mother and a Shudra father. He's prophesied to first commit maternal incest and later becomes a Siddha and a Jogachari. So Virūpākṣa receives the ear-cutting initiation, Nāth initiation from Gorekanatha, and the two set out on pilgrimage. Again, this a persistent emphasis on pilgrimage I mentioned before. They visit sites like Varanasi, Gaya, Prayag, Kamakya, the Himalayas, etc. They also visit a number of sites specifically located in and around the important historical region of Jajpur in Odisha. So we have like the Biraja Shaktipita, Trilochana Temple, Barahanatha Temple, the Siddheshwara Shiva Temple, and also nearby sort of temple cities like Bhubaneswar, Puri, the Kapilas Hill, etc. Eventually, on this vast pilgrimage, Goraknath and Virūpākṣa arrive at Hengula Devi. Now, this is probably a shlesha or kind of a synthesis or a pun, if you will, of the Hinglaj Mata in Balochistan, which is a very important Nāth site. So it's probably sort of gesturing to that site, but also a shlesha of a number of Hengula sites in Odisha. So it's probably kind of referencing both, if you will. Or at least sort of conjuring the association with the important Hinglaj site in Balochistan, but also referencing sort of these other Odia Hinglaj sites or Hengula sites. So while they're at they enter into Hengula Devi's infernal abode using mantras to protect themselves from the fiery inferno. And while they're in this fiery abode of Hengula, Hengula worships Goreka. They stay there for 9 nights or Navaratri, but instead of them worshiping the goddess, it is the goddess who worships Goraknath. And then at the end of that, she bestows upon Virupaksha 2 gifts, very important gifts. The first is a Vajra topi, a Vajra hat, a hat with a Vajra on it that is said to destroy stone idols nearly by bowing. So here we're seeing a continuity with this notion of Virupaksha destroying the Shivalingam merely by bowing, which we see in these earlier Tibetan sources. She also bestows upon him a magical Brahmadanda, a ascetic staff or stick that conjures illusions. Indeed, this was the danda that Brahma himself used when creating the universe, and so it has this thaumaturgical power to manifest miraculous things, and Virupaksha puts that to very comedic use. I'll describe how in just a moment. Then, after receiving these 2 gifts, Gorek departs for Kadali Kshetra to reunite with his guru Machindra. That site, Kadali Kshetra, is very important. We'll get to that in the next case example, while Virupaksha sets out to use his newfound gadgets. So how does he use these fun new toys? So he immediately returns to Jajpur in Odisha, where he had previously been exiled from his caste status. He uses the danda to turn the Baitrani River into alcohol, making everybody, all the farmers, all the Brahmins, all the people, all the animals, the cattle, everyone falls drunk, and it turns into a massive orgy, and everyone is losing their caste status, and everything's all messed up from a sort of caste purity standpoint. And so including all of those Brahmins who had previously shunned him and his mother. So this is sort of a little bit of get back, right? Slide on the Brahmins. So we can see a kind of a parallel here with some of these other broader Virupa narrative topoi, like the Ganga reversing or river magic theme that we see across Virupa stories. We also have this association with the tavern scene, again, alcohol, and also this notion of sort of taming or subduing arrogant beings. All of these are themes we see across the Virupa corpus. He next uses his gadgets to test Jagannatha in Puri. So Jagannatha is famously known as Daru Brahma, or a sort of a wooden embodiment of the divine. And so he's like, oh, you say you're made of wood and you're divine? Well, I have a hat that destroys stone idols. So if you're not made of wood, it will destroy you. So you better be made of wood. And I have a Brahma Danda. So if you call yourself a Daru Brahma, then you should be able to withstand my Brahma staff. So he goes to Jagannatha and he basically tries to destroy the Murti there using his Vajra hat and his Brahma Danda, but Jagannatha persists and cannot be touched or destroyed by these objects. So he realizes that Jagannatha is the real deal. Jagannatha is Daru Brahma. So here we even have sort of a Vaishnava kind of inflection here, right? Although I should add the Jagannatha site has very fascinating sort of Buddhist and Śaiva-Śākta undercurrents as well. So he finds out that Jagannath is the real deal. He supplicates Jagannatha. Jagannatha says, "Oh, you're a great Siddha. Don't worry, I'm not upset about it. But from this day forward, Jogis and Siddhas are banned from the Jagannatha temple because I don't want to set this precedent where all of you Siddhas and Jogis start coming to test me all the time, and it's going to turn into chaos, and there's going to be problems. So yes, you're a great Siddha. Yes, I respect you, but you yogis are no longer allowed in my temple. If you want to see darshan of me, you can look at the flag on top of my temple, or you can see me during the Rath Jatra, the famous chariot festival of Jagannatha." And so in this narrative, we see a reworking and odiification, if you will, of other popular Virupa hagiographical narrative topoi, like the destructive bowing theme, the iconoclasm and sort of linga splitting scene. Although Jagannatha isn't a linga, he's obviously a Vaishnava murti, but that same idea of sort of using the destructive bowing to destroy an idol, we see that come through. We also see this notion of expulsion, right, being expelled from the temple. And also a sexual pun on the name Dundee or Adundi, referring to the Dunda. This gets a little bit convoluted. You can follow up on this in my dissertation. So, this obviously is a Nāth text, but this emphasis on the Vajratopi and these yogosexual puns, particularly on the word dunda or an adandi, seem to mark Virupaksha as a tantric Buddhist. So the Vajra prefix often indexes Buddhiness, so a Vajratopi often emphasizes a kind of Buddhistness. But moreover, that notion of a Vajra hat or a Vajratopi calls to mind the Vajra Mukuta or the Vajra crown that is worn by tantric Buddhist ritual specialists or Vajracharyas, especially in Nepal, but also in the Tibetan tradition. So this notion of wearing a hat or a crown that is topped with a Vajra is a very Buddhist sort of image indeed. Okay, how are we doing on time? We're at about 40 minutes. I'm going to speed up here so that we can get to the images. So the second case study I look at is this text from the Konkan, that is the Kadali Manjunatha Mahatmya. So as in the Goraka Samhita from Odisha, the land of Kadali or Kadali Kshetra or Kadali Desha, Kadali Rajya factors prominently in many of these Siddha stories, and especially comes through in a number of Virupa stories, earlier Virupa stories, even Tibetan accounts, including both Shariputra's and Taranatha's stories. They mention him receiving the Chinnamasta Vajrayogini teachings from the Siddha Jalandhara in the land of Kandali or Konkana in the Tibetan sources. So this Kandali or Konkana is almost certainly the Konkan land of Kadali, or known as Kadri, which is in modern-day Mangaluru in Karnataka, which is the site of the Kadri Manjunatha temple. So as the name of this site implies, or this temple Manjunatha implies, from at least the 11th century, Kadri Manjunatha was an important tantric Buddhist nexus in the cult of Manjushri. Later, around the 13th, 14th century, it becomes an important Nāth site, and then later in the 16th century, the Nāths sort of lose their power at the sites, and Madhava Vaishnava Brahmins overtake administration of the temple. So we have a site that was a Buddhist vihara turned a Nāth site, turned a Shiva temple administered by Vaishnavas. So a very eclectic cross-sectarian site indeed. So in order to authorize the Vaishnava ascendancy of at this site, these Vaishnava Brahmins compiled this text as we know it today, again, likely to authorize their ascendancy there. However, in so doing, they didn't write most of this themselves. They repackaged older Buddhist and Nāth Shaiva lore from the site and kind of gave it a Vaishnava veneer. So we see a lot of older Buddhist and Nāth themes coming through in this text, even though it was compiled in its current form relatively late and by Vaishnavas. Nagaraju, the scholar, aptly calls the text a rare Shaiva Buddhist work with Vaishnava interpolations. I think that's a very apt way of describing the text. And so just a quick example of how these three sort of sectarian themes come through: Shaiva, Buddhist, and Vaishnava. For example, in opening verses of the text, Manjunatha is not only described as a combined embodiment of Shiva and Vishnu, but is also said to be Shakti, Buddha, Siddha, and Nātha. So he's everybody. And to that point, Manjunatha also manifests in 9 specific forms, which are the Navanathas, or the 9 Nāths, sort of 9 primordial Nāths. And Virūpākṣa, here also known as Konkaneshwar, which has some interesting kind of implications for the cult of Konkana Siddha across South India. So here Virūpākṣa or Konkaneshwara is one of these 9 Nāths, and there is about 5 chapters devoted to telling his story. So in those stories, he is born as an upstanding Brahmin. His mother is likened unto Lakshmi. She's named Srimati. That has some important, interesting connections with the Chinnamasta Vajrayogini lineage. He sets out to benefit beings as a wandering Avaduta. He travels all over South Asia. Even meets, this is an important piece. I was very fortunate to receive teachings on the Virupaksha Panchashika from Acharya ji, and in this very important Pratya Abhigya text, it opens with this story of Virupaksha meeting Indra in Indra's celestial abode, and Indra is caught up watching these dueling elephants, this magical display of dueling elephants, and he doesn't notice Virūpākṣa approaching, and so Virūpākṣa, in order to sort of get his attention and show that, like, hey, I'm even more powerful than you, Virūpākṣa conjures this scene of dueling mountains. So we have, and obviously there's this association between elephants and mountains, or mountains as sort of stone elephants. So here we have this scene in which Virūpākṣa manifests these two mountains fighting to Indra. That story is the frame story of this important Pratyabhijna text called the Virupaksha Panchashika. And here in this text, we see that same narrative play out. That is important, although it's a bit of a tangent, bear with me. That's important because that shows that at least some traditions were associating the Virupaksha of the Virupaksha Panchashika with the Virupa Siddha of this broader Virupa literary corpus. So interesting little parallel there. I only mention that since there is a connection with Acharyaji teaching this very important text. He then, Virupaksha in this story, then heads east and south to Kalinga, Draksharama, and Bhimeshwara. Again, this is the same Bhimeshwara in Draksharama that in other texts he destroys the lingam there. He goes to Kanchi, Srirangam, Chidambara in Tamil Nadu, and a number of other places. So in Kalinga, or that is Odisha, he converts a king by manifesting as Mahakarunika. Again, this is a very common Buddhist epithet for Avalokiteshvara. And then he tames a tiger demon named Sharjula and rides on its back. This calls to mind the iconography of the Siddha Dombiherika, who is usually depicted riding on a tiger, and who is also described as one of Virupa's disciples in other texts. In Draksharama, again, this site where in other texts he splits the lingam, he is excluded and expelled from that site by these Brahmins because of his Avaduta appearance. So he rebukes these Brahmins for ostracizing him. He rebukes them for ostracizing him and also for their arrogance and greed in selling the Vedas. And he rebukes them by making a nearby cat perfectly recite the 4 Vedas and then scolds them for their arrogance. They're like, oh my goodness, we're so sorry. You're a great Siddha. Please come in. So here we see a maybe softer kind of reworking of his rebuke or his destruction of the Bhimeshwari lingam. In this version, he doesn't split the lingam, but he does at least rebuke the Brahmins. And in Kanchi, he teaches Dharma by day and cavorts with women by night, even going so far as to seize the moon itself as a wine goblet for his beloved. And the gods beg him to restore it because the whole land goes into darkness and so forth. So here we not only see this yogo-sexual Buddhist topos, but also a kind of parallel with the sun-stopping tavern scene. Remember in the earlier sources, or in many, not even just the earlier sources, and many other Virupa hagiographies, he stops the sun in order to continue drinking in the tavern. So here, instead of, there's still the drinking aspect, a wine goblet, but instead he's seizing the moon instead of seizing the sun. Of course, this is a sort of encoded teachings on the drinking or the control over the sun and moon channels and the drinking of the elixir of Amrita in the central channel. So we have encoded in these stories yogic instructions. Finally, our third case, just a few more minutes and then we'll get to stories. I promise I will reward you. So here we're going to look at these 2 narrative streams in Nepal. So many Virupa hagiographies describe the Siddha Virupa character as visiting the Himalayas. And we have a long history of Virupa reverence in the Kathmandu Valley. This was an important site for that 6 Varahi scriptures tradition, which is that tradition that transmits the Chinnamasta Vajrayogini instructions. So the Kathmandu Valley is a very important site for the Virupa kind of legacy. And to this day, these Buddhists and Nāths and other Śaiva-Śāktas remain deeply engaged in dialogue in Nepal to this day. I mentioned before there are these 2 streams, parallel streams, intertwined and interdependent, but nonetheless discernible. There are these non-Buddhist stories, version of the stories, and Virupa stories, and these Buddhist versions of the Virupa stories in Nepal. The non-Buddhist version of the story goes something like this. Following a prophecy, Virūpākṣa loses his Brahmin caste status and contracts leprosy due to committing great sins like eating meat, drinking alcohol, cavorting with prostitutes, and especially maternal incest. There's that great sinner topos once again. He sets out on pilgrimage to cleanse his misdeeds and meets Naimuni. Naimuni is Nepal's eponymous saint or rishi. And Naimuni instructs Virūpākṣa in the proper performance of the pilgrimage to Nepal's 64 Tirthalingas. So this is a thoroughgoing Shaiva Vratakatha, right? It is describing how you go to these 64 lingas, the stories you tell, the way you bathe, the way you worship, etc. And Nemuni is the one reciting or telling to Virūpākṣa how to do all of this. So it goes through many chapters, like over almost 100 chapters of all these different sites. So one of them, one of the most important ones, is when they visit Manichuda Hill, which is the hill where the present Vajrayogini temple above the village of Sanku resides even today. And there, in this thoroughgoing Shaiva text, Virūpākṣa has an enlightening encounter with Vajrayogini. Vajrayogini is described as an embodiment of Shakti and Mahakali, Mahadevi, etc. But she is called Vajrayogini. He has a vision of her. She cleanses his sins and prophesies that he will become a Siddha. So even in this very thoroughgoing Shaiva text, the Virūpākṣa Tirtha Yatra is a part of the Himavat Khanda, which is ascribed to the Skanda Purana. Yes, it is apocryphal or an addendum, but the fact that it ascribes itself to the Skanda Purana really emphasizes these strong Shaiva characteristics, and yet in this text, it is Vajrayogini who cleanses his sins and prophesizes his Siddhahood. Similarly, in the Buddhist stream of versions, you'll notice they're very similar but slightly different. In the Buddhist stream of Nepalese Virūpākṣa stories, following a prophecy, Virūpākṣa loses his Brahmin caste status and contracts leprosy due to committing great sins like maternal incest. All of that's the same. He sets out to find a teacher who can help him absolve his misdeeds, but instead of finding Nemuni, first he goes to Shiva. Shiva tells him to drink molten copper, but it burns his face right as he's about to drink it, and he realizes, oh, that would kill me if I did it, so I'm not going to do it. So instead, he goes out and seeks out a Buddhist teacher. In some versions, it's the Buddha himself. In some versions, it's Avalokiteshvara, and in other versions, it's a Buddhist monk. But anyways, he goes and finds a Buddhist teacher who tells him to recite Avalokiteshvara's Mani mantra of compassion until his prayer beads break. Here we have a parallel, and multiple times the beads don't break, and he gets frustrated and throws his mala down. We see in this a parallel with earlier Tibetan stories in which he gets discouraged and throws his mala in the toilet famously, and then a goddess appears to him and says, dude, why'd you do that? You're on the precipice of attaining Siddhahood, so go get your mala out of the toilet and pick it back up and get back to work. So we see that same topos play out in these Nepali versions. He does just that. He goes back and gets his mala and finally finishes his absolutions. And now a Siddha with powers, now he wants to take his revenge on Shiva for giving this bad advice about drinking the molten copper. So he goes around kicking all the Shiva lingas as in revenge for Shiva giving bad advice, which on the surface you might read as kind of a sectarian thing against lingas and against Shaivism, but you would be fooled, because when he goes to Pashupatinath to destroy the lingam there, Shiva Pashupati takes refuge in the Buddha or Avalokiteshvara, saying, hey, your disciple is coming here and he's going to destroy me, like, hey, help me out. Buddha or Avalokiteshvara bestows upon Pashupati their 5 Buddha crown and teaches him the Uposhaddha Vrat or the Ashtami Vrata, which is to Avalokiteshvara. So when Virūpākṣa arrives at the Pashupatinath temple, instead of finding Pashupati as this, evil, arrogant guy who gave him this bad advice, instead he sees Pashupati as an embodiment of Avalokiteshvara, sitting there wearing the Buddha crown, again going back to the Vajratopi theme we saw before, wearing the Buddha crown and engaging in this Ashtami Vrata, this Buddhist Vrata. So finally, he joins Pashupati in the Vrata, and they're doing their feast and everything. And in order to continue enjoying the feast, he stops the sun in the sky. Again, going back to this earlier sun-stopping theme. Now, as I said, you might read the latter as kind of a claim of Buddhism's superiority over Shaivism, because Virūpākṣa is destroying lingams, and Pashupati needs to take refuge in the Buddha or Avalokiteshvara for protection. But in the actual lived traditions of Nepal, Shaivas and Buddhists revere these stories and revere the figure of Virūpākṣa equally. I'll show you a number of images from Shaiva sites, and there are actually at least 3 major festivals, popular religious observances, that are still celebrated in Nepal to this day that center on Virūpākṣa. The first of them is called Mukashtami or Mukuta Ashtami, that is coronation on the 8th. This commemorates Buddha bestowing the 5 Buddha crown and the teachings of Uposathavrata to Pashupati. And this festival is celebrated by the placing of a 5 Buddha crown, or it's more like a sheath or a cover, a metallic cover, placing a 5 Buddha crown on major Shivalingas, even at important Shaiva temple sites like Pashupatinath in Deopatan and Kumbheshwar and Patan. There was some doubt as to whether this was actually performed at Pashupatinath, but I have direct informant and ethnographic reports that this does still happen at Pashupatinath. It is just not so popular among the Orthodox Shaiva administration, and so they do it in private and in secret early in the morning. But I have good evidence that it does still happen, and in Kumbheshwar and Patan, it definitely happens because we have pictures of it. So we have Shaiva priests putting this sheath over the Shiva lingam with 5 Buddhas on it, essentially turning the lingam into a Buddha Chaitya. So that's Mukashtami. The second festival, we have Luku Mahadya, or hidden Mahadeva. In this festival, this festival commemorates the time when Shiva hid in a trash heap to avoid Virūpākṣa's destructive vengeance. And so for this festival, the Newa community will cover a Shiva linga in their courtyard with trash and worship it with impure substances. And this is directly connected back to the Virūpākṣa story. And there's also this fair, or Makar Mela, Capricorn fair. Sorry, there's a typo there. Capricorn fair that happens in Panauti at the site of Indrashwar, where Indra did penance to Shiva. And this comes directly out of the Virūpākṣa Tirtha Yatra text, where Nemuni and Virūpākṣa go to this site, and Nemuni tells the story of that and whatnot. So this is a 12-yearly bathing festival that happens at Panauti, and there's a beautiful Virūpākṣa image actually right there above the Unmata Bhairava temple. I'll show you a picture of it in just a moment. Finally, getting to our conclusions here. So while many Siddha characters cut across sectarian boundaries, and all literary characters, are hybrid to a certain extent, I argue that the Siddha Virupa character stands out for the degree to which his stories foreground and underscore his religious hybridity. In the Buddhist sources, he conspicuously indexes a sort of Shivaness. In non-Buddhist sources, he continually indexes Buddhistness. Being born of Buddhist Shaiva dialogue, the Siddha Virupa character is uniquely well suited to articulate cross-sectarian histories. I argue that this explicit Buddhist Shaiva, and especially Buddhist Nāth hybridity, largely accounts for the Siddha Virupa character's enduring popularity in places of Buddhist non-Buddhist interaction, like Odisha, the Konkan, and the Kathmandu Valley. So, therefore, to reduce such narratological nuance to mere historiography overlooks the broader didactic and rhetorical value of these fascinating stories. By didactic, I mean the way that certain yogic teachings are encoded in the stories themselves, and by rhetorical, I'm talking about the way that different communities sort of re-envision or remember the Virupa hagiographies to suit their sort of sectarian or sociological or religious theological concerns. And as I promised, here I will now get into some share and tell. I'll go through these images relatively quickly, but since we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A, if you want me to go back to any particular image, I am more than happy to. I just wanted to share a lot of this material, art historical material, because a lot of it, I included some of the art historical material in my dissertation, but for the purpose of finishing and getting it done, which is, my advisors say the best kind of dissertation is a done dissertation. So in the spirit of just getting it done, I had to call out a bunch of the art historical material. I've been publishing some of it on the side as articles, partnering with the Patan and Hanumandoka museums in Nepal, and now the Rubin Museum in New York City. So I have been publishing some of this material, but I still have only been able to share a small bit of it. So you all are getting a sort of first-hand look at some of this material. Okay, so here we have across the top, we have a Gorakhnath on the far left, we have Matsyendra in the middle, and we have, of course, Virupa on the far right. This is at that site in Panauti, the site of the Makar Mela. So this is in the Indreshwar Mahadev temple complex. These are three windows right above in the second story of the Unmata Bhairava temple. Now, Unmata Bhairava is interesting because he has a kind of yogo sexual tantric kind of connotation, and many Unmata Bhairava temples in Nepal have an image of Gorakhnath there, but here we also have Virupa or Virūpākṣa on the far right in his famous sun-stopping gesture. Here again, he's being indexed as a Nāth. And similarly, below we have on the left a stone image of Virūpākṣa or Virupa, and on the right we have an image of Matsyendranath. You can just barely make out the halo of fish that are surrounding him. It's very difficult the way they've lacquered the images, but there's a circle of fish around him, so we can know this is Matsyendranath. These are found in a little Śaiva-Śākta temple on top of the Mrigastali hill, very near to the Nāth Mutt, the Mrigastali Nāth Mutt. And this commemorates a scene in there's also an image of Gorakhnath in this same little temple. This commemorates a scene from that Virupaksha Tirthayatra text from the Himavat Khanda, in which Virupaksha and Nemuni go to Mrigastali and encounter there Matsyendra, Gorakhnath, and Chaurangi. And so we have images of all four of those Nāth yogis in this little temple. Here at the Jayabhageshwari temple, these are arranged vaguely geographically. So we were first we were at Panauti outside the valley. Then we looked at Mrigastali, which is at Pashupatinath. Now near Pashupatinath is the Jayabhageshwari temple. On the side, this is ostensibly a Shakta temple, actually where the history of the temple is a little bit obscure. Gudrun Bunneman has done some great work on this site, but it's still a little unclear as to the origins of this temple. But she is ostensibly a Śaiva-Śākta deity now. On the side of the temple, you have this gorgeous Bhairava mural that is continually repainted every several years. And in the 8 smashanas surrounding him, there are the 8 siddhas, according to basically following the iconography of the Buddhist tantras that describe the 8 cremation grounds as having trees, nagas, mountains, siddhas, directional protectors, etc. But as Gudrun Bunneman notes, around the 16th, 17th century, you start to see Shivalingas also appearing in those charnel ground scenes. So here we have Virupa pointing to the sun with a Buddhist chaitya and a Shivalinga right next to him, again emphasizing this cross-sectarianness. And on the same temple, on the roof struts, are images of several siddhas, including Virupa and Dombiherika, as you see here. And you will notice that around their necks, they are wearing a Singna Jainu, the sacred thread and whistle, which is a sign of an initiated Nāth yogi. And so I have zoomed in at the bottom. You can see the two details of their Singna Jainus, their Nāth whistles. So here we have these Buddhist siddhas on a Śaiva-Śākta temple being depicted as initiated Nāth yogis. Similarly, in another Śaiva-Śākta context, or ostensibly, this is the Mulchok in Patan. So now we're going to Patan, Durbar Square. This is one of my absolute favorite Virupa or Virūpākṣa images in all of Nepal. This is the only image of Virūpākṣa in the world that I have found in which he is depicted with 4 arms. So we can see he's holding a skull cup and pointing to the sun in the famous sun-stopping scene, but he also has a Vajra and a bell, which very much indexes him as a Buddhist Vajracharya, right? These are the 2 ritual implements of, par excellence for Tantric Buddhism. And so here in this ostensibly Shaiva area that is, patronized by Vaishnava royalty, we have an image of a Buddhist Siddha with Buddhist implements in a more or less Shaiva context. Again, and apologize my silly picture there. I just wanted to give you the context. Here inside the Patan Palace, we have in what's called the Vidyapita. This was formerly the royal family's personal tantric shrine. We have this beautiful wooden cabinet, and carved on in the periphery of the wooden cabinet are the 8 siddhas of the 8 cremation grounds, and of course we have there depicted Virupa, again in this very sort of Shaiva Vaishnava milieu. in Patan. Right outside the palace, we have the beautiful Kashi Vishwanath temple with these incredibly ornate toranas. And on these toranas, we see depicted across the bottom, we have details. We see Virūpākṣa on the far left in his sun-stopping sort of wrathful gesture. We have in the middle Gorakhnath. It's difficult to see, but he's leaning on an achala or yoga danda or brahma danda. He's leaning on it kind of casually. And then on the far right, we have Matsyendranath, again, heavily worn. These are probably 17th century carvings, but we can see Matsyendranath in that halo of fish once again. Here now we're switching over to Hanumandoka Durbar Square. We were at the Patan Durbar Square. Now we're going to the Kathmandu or Hanumandoka Durbar Square. Inside Mohan Chowk, which was the king's private tantric courtyard, we see images of various siddhas. And so here we see Virūpākṣa and Matsyendranath once again. And just like at Jayabhageshwari and elsewhere, you see they are again depicted as Nāth yogis wearing the sacred thread and whistle known as the Singna Jainu around their either around their neck or worn like a sacred thread across their shoulder. So Virūpākṣa has his across his shoulder. There's a zoom in of the whistle below, and Matsyendranath has it around his neck, and there's a picture of that as well. So once again, we have a Śaiva-Śākta tantric milieu, royal Śaiva-Śākta tantric milieu, depictions of Buddhist and Nāth siddhas, but they're being depicted as initiated Nāth yogis. Once again, lots of sort of dialogue happening here. Nearby to Mohan Chowk, actually visible from Mohan Chowk, is the spectacular Taleju Bhawani temple. This has fascinating connections with the Tuleja tradition of the Deccan. So again, these large geographical interconnections. But the Taleju Bhawani temple on the south side has this incredibly ornate bronze-sheathed doorway. And around the edge of this doorway are depictions of the 8 charnel grounds and various siddhas. So here in the top right, we see Gorakhnath sitting on his bowl, and behind him you can see both a Shivalinga and a Buddhist Chaitya, again speaking to this dialogue. We see below Virupa with a lingam behind him, and then on the left side we see Matsyendranath with the halo of fish, and below him is Luipa eating the guts of a fish. Nearby in the same Durbar Square on the Naudega or Bimaleshwara Shiva temple, on the roof struts, we have images of Virupa and Matsyendranath, as well as other siddhas. Here, this is outside of my expertise. I'm sure we have these wonderful Vimarsha experts here that might be able to identify this figure in this poba. I would guess Bhairava and Guyakali, but I'm not entirely sure. But anyways, I do know enough to know that this is a Śaiva or Śaiva-Śākta poba, and in the upper left and upper right-hand corners, we have depictions of siddhas, and so I have zoomed in on this depiction of Virupa in his sun-stopping gesture in the upper left corner of this rather Shaiva poba. So again, speaking to these cross-sectarian currents. Now here on the other side of the aisle, we have a very clearly Buddhist poba. Surrounded by, it's interesting, this is one of the few peaceful deities that we see surrounded by the 8 charnel grounds in the Newa tradition of the Kathmandu Valley. But at any rate, here we have it. And in the 8 charnel grounds, we not only have the 8 siddhas, the 8 chaityas, the 8 trees, the 8 nagas, the 8 kshatrapalas, all of the stuff described in the Buddhist texts. But we also have the 8 bhairavas and the ashtamatrika. So we have a kind of Śaiva-Śākta inflection there. And we have in this Buddhist poba, we have once again Virupa being depicted as a Nāth yogi. So on the right, I have upper right, we have a detail of Virupa. Notice he's wearing this very particular kind of hat. Below, I've taken a picture of the training of the new Pir Mahant at the Baba Ratanath Mutt in Nepal and in Dang in Nepal. So you can see Nāths in Nepal still wear these particular kinds of Sufi style topis, these pointy topis. And so in this picture, you can see Virupa in this Buddhist poba being depicted wearing a Nāth style hat. But not only that, if you look very closely over his shoulder, right around the area of his heart, he is again wearing a Singna Jainu, the thread with the sacred whistle. So he, again, in this Buddhist image, is very clearly being depicted as an initiated Nāth yogi. That's it for the show and tell for now. I would love to open it up to questions, and I am more than happy to go back to any of the previous images or any of the previous slides as you see fit. I've gone just a few minutes over. I appreciate your time, and I'm eager to hear your questions.
Thank you so much, Weston. This was a really, really fascinating talk. I wish I could stop time to allow us to the talk to keep going on. Um, Really, really fascinating. So, what I would love is that if you have any questions, you can use the hand raising function, and we will call on you to unmute. But just to get the conversation started, and I know this is a super annoying question because you've read so much, and I'm going to ask you about some other things. But
Please.
the question would be, you've talked a lot about the hagiography and the kind of the story of Virupa, but I wonder if you would see any parallels in terms of the actual teachings. So maybe
Mm,
I bought into the Sakya sort of story of it, but I wonder like Vajra verses, right, are considered to be maybe some of Virupa's earliest, most foundational work. Maybe there are others that you have in mind. And then maybe the Virupaksha Panchasika, right? So we have these two texts that are focused not on biography, but on doctrine. So if you were to read some of the texts that are attributed to Virupa or Virupaksha, do you see any similarities in terms of what they're teaching? Or is it just the similarities in the themes of their life?
Absolutely wonderful question. So, this is where a lot of my research has been going since I've completed the dissertation. So, I'm very eager to share some of the bits. So, the disconcerting fact of the matter is, and now absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, of course, but we have to be careful with this. The connection between the Vajra verses and Virupa is tenuous at best. The connections between Virupa and the entire connections to the Lamdre tradition going back prior than Gayadhara are we don't have any evidence whatsoever. And so Ronald Davidson has famously argued that has shown that this Gayadhara figure was a little bit dubious. He claimed to be Maitripa, even though he wasn't, to kind of he fooled some Tibetans into thinking he was Maitripa and other things. Now, whether you buy into Davidson's argument entirely is a separate question, but I do agree with Davidson's assessment that trying to trace the teachings of the Lamdre and the Vajra verses to Virupa is difficult at best, arguably impossible with the evidence that we have today. Now, maybe there will be more evidence found. I'm not sure. All of the earliest evidence on the Buddhist side that we have of lineages connected to Virupa, both in South Asian sources and in Tibetan sources, associate him with Vajrayogini. Remember, in Abhayadatta Sri, which comes slightly before in the Tales of the 84 Siddhas, it's not Nairatmya that he has a vision of. It's Vajravarahi. It's in these later Sakya versions that she gets changed. Well, in the He Vajratantra, Nairatmya is in one chapter identified as Vajravarahi, so you could make an argument that they are equivalent, but the name used in the stories is Vajravarahi, and the earliest one only later becomes Nairatmya. Similarly, in this collection related to Vajrayogini Chinnamasta, the headless form of Vajrayogini that I talked about before, which probably predates Abhayadatta Sri's Tales of the 84 Siddhas, that has a hagiography and all of the teachings preserved as well in this large collection. And again, he's associated with Vajrayogini, right? So on the earliest evidence that we have on the Buddhist side is all Vajrayogini, especially Chinnamasta, okay? And through Chinnamasta, we get to the Amrita Siddhi, the teachings on Hatha Yoga. Now, remember, the Mangala Shloka, the opening verses of the Amrita Siddhi, are to Chinnamasta, and in Chinnamasta Vajrayogini, and in the Shangpa Kagyu tradition, where those teachings are still preserved, the lineage of the Amrita Siddhi is traced back to Chinnamasta herself. Okay, so you have Vajrayogini, Chinnamasta, and Amrita Siddhi Hatha Yoga in the earliest Buddhist example. Now, in the Virupaksha Panchashika, you have this description of ahamkara and the union of and hum. Now, from the Buddhist side of things, that union of and hum, it resides in the navel as the sacred feminine, hum resides at the crown as the sacred masculine, through the Hatha Yogic or Tumo Chandali practices of entering the wind into the central channel, causing the central fire to blaze up the central channel, causing sacred feminine to unite with sacred masculine at the crown. what do we have? Meets hum. We have aham, this notion of the union of the self. So we have vaguely in this notion of ahamkara between the Buddhist Amrita Siddhi and Vajrayogini Chandali or Tumo Hatha yogic teachings and the Virupaksha Panchashika. You have vaguely this notion of ahamkara. You also have associated with both traditions vaguely this notion of kind of the co-emergent or sahaja or this kind of all-encompassing micro macro kind of higher non-dualist teachings. And also in the Virupaksha Panchashika, one of the five Shaktis named is Dhuma. And in the Buddhist tradition of Palden Lama Dutsuma or Sri Devi Dumangari or Dumavati, we have a Buddhist lineage that traces its Dumangari or Duma practice back to Virupa. So in both sides, you also in the Buddhist text and also in the Virupaksha Panchashika, you have this emphasis on the goddess Duma. So sort of across these different texts, we see similar kinds of emphasis. Hatha yoga teachings involving the central channel, emphasis on the goddess Dhumavati and other forms of Shakti like Vajrayogini and Chinnamasta, the notion of ahamkara, and also this kind of broader non-dualistic sahaja kind of philosophy. That's a very sort of brief preview or overview of it. There's lots more to unpack, but I'll leave it there for now.
That's fantastic. So we have one question from chat, and then we'll get to Deepthi, who has a question as well.
Sure.
The question from chat is, if possible, could you shed some light on the connection between Lakshminkara and Virupaksha? So can you just tell
Yeah.
us more about that?
Absolutely. So this is something that's very right at the top of my work and my mind lately. So Lakshmankara is said to be Virupa's guru in the lineage of Chinnamasta Vajrayogini. Actually, it's not just Chinnamasta Vajrayogini. It's actually three forms of Vajrayogini or Vajravarahi. There's the two-faced dancing form, which is the most popular form we see all over the place. So this is the one with the human head and the pig head out the side or out the top. We also have Chinnamasta in this collection, and we also have Artha Siddhi, this pig-headed, four-armed magnetizing form of Vajrayogini or Vajravarahi. So these three forms of Vajrayogini or Vajravarahi are encapsulated in a collection of teachings known as the six Varahi scriptures, or it comes to be transmitted in Tibet as the Chel threefold Varahi. What is it? Chel Luk Pakmo Kor Sum. So the threefold Varahi cycle of the Chel tradition. That's named after Chel Lotsawa, who is the Tibetan, received these teachings from a Newa Pandit named Virendra Ruchi or Hangdu Karpo, the white tantric in the Kathmandu Valley, received this lineage and transmitted it to Tibet. So this six Varahi scriptures tradition, also known as the Chel Varahi tradition, preserves these three forms of Vajravarahi. Most particularly, Lakshmankara and Virupa are associated especially with the Chinnamasta lane within that. So for example, we have an early maybe 12th, 13th century Nepalese Sanskrit text known as the Shamsher manuscript or the Amana Sikara Krama. And in this, this is one of the earliest Sanskrit texts enumerating lists of Siddha lineages. And in there, we have a description of the Chinnamasta Vajrayogini lineage going from Lakshmankara to Virupa to Avadutipa and onward down to that Newa Pandit Virendaruchi and then on to the Tibetan Chel Lotsawa. So we have in that early Sanskrit material, also in this early manuscript collection that I was talking about that Kurt Kutzer of UC Berkeley and I have been working on. This collection preserves all of the this collection was actually sealed in the 17th century or 17th century was sealed in a library in Tibet and was locked up until the early 21st century. So even Taranatha is saying in his commentaries on the Chinnamasta tradition, oh, we don't have a lot of the texts, they're difficult to find, etc., because these texts weren't available to him at that time, but they are now available to us because they had been seized in the kind of sectarian wars of Tibet. They had been seized by a particular lama and then hidden in this library in Lhasa and only recently unsealed. So in this collection, we have all of these early Vajrayogini or six Varahi scriptures teachings. We have these hagiographies. We also have actual teachings themselves. And in this collection, again, we have a lineage hagiography, and once again, the lineage is transmitted from Vajrayogini to Lakshmankara to Virupa. And so across the board, the earliest Buddhist sources associate Virupa with Lakshmankara. Also in several hagiographies, either his guru or his mother is said to be Srimati or Lakshmi, which are again names of Lakshmankara. And even in the Kadali Manjunatha Mahatmya, this rare Shaiva Buddhist work with Vaishnava interpolations, even in that text, his mother is identified as Srimati, who is likened unto Lakshmi. And so once again, that is sort of a much looser and much more distant, but I argue is a vague reference back to this Chinnamasta lineage, because this Chinnamasta lineage likely was practiced in the Konkan. Mallinson famously argues that Virupaksha, or the Amrita Siddhi, was probably composed in the Konkan around the region of Kadri. And we have numerous texts like Shariputra, Taranathas, etc., that describe Virupa practicing Chinnamasta Vajrayogini in the Konkan, in Kadri specifically. And so it's not a stretch to think that this reference to Virupa's mother being Srimati or Lakshmi, again, both epithets of Lakshmankari, might be a kind of gesture back to this older lineage that was practiced in this region. So that's, again, just a little drop in the bucket. There's so much more to unpack about the six Varahi scriptures. I have several forthcoming articles due to be published over the next year that unpack a lot of that manuscript collection that was sealed in Tibet that I talked about, and sort of unpacking this broader six Varahi scriptures tradition, because it was one of the most important in Tibet. It was one of the most important Vajrayogini cycles, but today it's much lesser known. But it was very important, and I would love to kind of share more about the importance of that cycle. And it is in that cycle that Virupa is said to be the disciple of Lakshmankara.
Great. Next, we have Deepthi. I'll ask you to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, namaskar. So, thank you for your illuminating talks. I would like to know a few questions. First is, when we go to Bhagwan Ramana's ashram, there is Virupaksha caves there where he meditated. So is it related to the same?
Yeah,
One,
I think it may be. I think it may be. There is a strong association with Virupaksha in the Tamil Nadu region. Again, in the Kadali Manjunatha Mahatmya, he's known as Konkaneshwara. And across Tamil Nadu, especially in Tanjavur, we have the Brihadishwara temple and a
yes,
Konkaneshwara temple. And that was supposedly founded by a Konkana Siddha.
yes,
And we have, like, in the Chola Champu, we have a Konkana Siddha. And so this Konkana Siddha is probably Virupaksha, aka Konkaneshwara or Konkana Siddha. And because of this popularity in the Tamil Nadu, in the broader Deccan region, I think it may be that Ramana Maharishiji's cave may be related to the Siddha. Of course, the
where,
distinction
where,
between the Siddha and Virupaksha Shiva and Virupaksha the Siddha, the lines get blurry, but I think there may be a connection.
then what if we see a bigger picture? Is there a connection between, we know Ma Chinnamasta and Nāth yogis very they worship, but how this is related to Kashmir Shaivism? I think there is a connection between Kashmir Shaivism, Marchinam, and Shri Vidya also. I mean, see, because you spoke about Shri, when we say Shri Vidya and the Dasa Mahavidyas, so how these are all, where you find them, how this goes, what is the,
Yeah.
how, from beginning to end, how it all happened.
I think I'm definitely not an expert enough to give a beginning to end treatment, but I might be able to sort of sprinkle some clues for you to pursue. I think the major connection, once again, is Virupaksha's association with the Deccan, right? We call this Kashmir Shaivism, but a lot of these texts, including the Virupaksha Panchashika and the Pratya Abhigya more broadly, were transmitted across the Deccan extensively, right? So, like Chidambaram in Tamil Nadu was a major important site for the transmission of a lot of these traditions that we call Kashmiri Shaivism, right? So, given the Deccan sort of broader Deccan milieu in which Kashmiri Shaivism, or what we might call Kashmiri Shaivism, spread, or maybe more broadly the kind of Kaula teachings more broadly, it's likely because of Virupaksha's association with the Deccan, especially the Konkan and the site of Kadri. Remember, even in Tibetan Buddhist sources, they say Virupaksha practiced Chinnamasta Vajrayogini at the teachings of Jalandhara and Lakshmankara in the Konkan or in Kadri. Mallinson argues that the Amrita Siddhi, which also invokes Chinnamasta, was probably composed at Kadri, and we have in Kadri this nexus or this coming together of Buddhist, Nāth, and broader Kaula kind of currents. There's an interesting connection between the Kadri site and Chidambaram. I encourage you to look at the dissertation to unpack that a bit. So I have a feeling that these networks from Kashmir, Nepal, Odisha, Tamil Nadu, all of these networks are coming together in the Konkan region and in the broader Deccan itself. And I think that's where you're seeing a lot of this interconnection. And one of the reasons why I argue that this is so important is because this also really pushes back. There's a long kind of academic tendency to associate South Asian Tantric Buddhism with East India. And now, yes, we have lots of like the Mahaviharas are in like Bihar and Bengal and Uttar Pradesh, or what might be called North or Northeast India. So it's not that there isn't an emphasis on East India, but these traditions really showed that Tantric Buddhism was flourishing across South India as well. And so one of the kind of major interventions is showing this important site, the Kadri Manjunath site, very important for the Tantric cult of Manjushri, very important for the Buddhist Chinnamasta tradition, very important for Virupa, the Virupaksha legacy. And it just so happens that in that same region, we have these Kashmiri Shaiva non-dualism, also Shaiva Siddhanta, also Vira Shaiva or Vira Maheshwaras. We have all of these kind of currents converging in this important region.
So can you please message what are those sites in Konkana,
I
particular
would
temple?
I would love to. I will
Message,
definitely
if
follow
you
up.
can message. And also, can you, if it's
We're a little
possible,
tight on time, so a quick
yeah,
question,
yeah, just
please.
one more thing. The Yogini text, the Varahi Yogini text, if you can share, will it be possible for you to share?
I'm in the process of translating those texts. There's like 500 pages of them, so it will be a while, but they will be made available, and I'm more than happy to give you
So,
some leads in that regard.
so okay, so fine. They are in which language?
Tibetan, also some in Sanskrit. A lot of the Virupa Chinnamasta texts are also available in Sanskrit in this collection called the Guhya Samaya Sadhana Mala, a collection of Sanskrit Buddhist Vajrayogini texts. And so a lot of this material is also extant in Sanskrit. So
So whatever is
I'll
in,
give you some leads.
yeah, if whatever is in Sanskrit, if you can share, and the sites in Konkan region which can be visited.
La.
Thanks so
Okay.
much. Okay. Actually, funny enough, you mentioned the Virupaksha Panchasika. I think the original, like we have manuscripts in Sharada,
Uh-huh.
but the commentary is
Yeah.
mostly found in South Indian
Yeah.
languages, like
This is this
Malayalam.
Vidya Chakravartin or Sri Vidya
Exactly.
Chakravartin. Right, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Next up, John Newman, if you could unmute and ask your question, you should be able to unmute now. Otherwise, I can ask on your behalf. I'll ask on your behalf. John says, fascinating, illuminating talk. Can we differentiate Virupa or Birua from Virūpākṣa in the sense that in the early sources, the Buddhists tend to prefer the former, whereas Shaivas tend to prefer the latter? I'm aware the two names are combined or conflated in later works. Any feedback on this will be welcome.
Yeah, so like in Munidatta's commentary on the Charyagitis, we have Virupa referred to in both Birua and Virūpākṣa. So even in early Buddhist texts from South Asia, we also have Vanaratna calls him Virūpākṣa. We also have Shariputra, who's a Buddhist, calls him Virūpākṣa. But in general, I would say you are right that the more broadly, the earlier Buddhist sources tend to use the name Birua or Virupa. There are examples of the name Virūpākṣa being used, but they are less common. The name Virūpākṣa is more popular in the South Asian sources. I think so. Yes, there is a slight chronological kind of development there. Earlier sources tend to kind of favor Birua or Virupa over Virūpākṣa. Later sources kind of favor Virūpākṣa, but actually, rather than it being chronological, I would encourage you to maybe think of it more geographical. So South Asian sources, even early ones, use a mixture of the names Birua, Virupa, or Virūpākṣa. Tibetan sources, even from the earliest strata, tend to use the name Virupa or Birwa. So it is both slightly a chronological thing, but also a geographical thing. And I think part of that has a lot to do with, in South Asia, the continuity between the names Virupa and Virūpākṣa. Both are names of Shiva, and Virupa is like a short form of Virūpākṣa. And so there is a cultural kind of context for that. And South Asian Buddhists are less concerned with like preserving things exactly as they are, whereas Tibetan Buddhists are much more concerned with preserving it exactly as they received it, because there's this idea that it needs to be traced back to India to be proper, to be authentic. And so because of that, I get the sense that the Tibetans, at least in the early strata, are much more concerned with preserving this name Birua, because that's the form that they received in the text that they received. But in later Tibetan sources like Pema Karpo, also Shariputra, also Vanaratna, etc., we also see the name Virūpākṣa used. So yeah, I'm content to talk about the kind of the differences in name usage and chronology over temporal and geographic space, but it's just when we start to say that those refer explicitly to two different Virupas, that's where I start to say, okay, but the sources just simply don't back that up.
And so we're close to time, but I'm hoping you'll give us another 5 or so minutes so we can
Yeah, I'm happy to.
hear from Professor Acharya Timosina to kind of have some dialogue with you and to formally thank you for taking your time out to share with us this really wonderful research you've been doing. I'm sure he was really excited to see the imagery that you have from Nepal as well. So please,
Yeah.
Acharya-ji, take us home. And I can ask you to unmute now. Okay, perfect.
I am so sincerely thankful to you, Dr. Harris. I was fortunate to have a meeting just a week ago in person at a conference in Fairfield University. This whole thing goes back to the initial conversation I was having with Dr. Anna Fones on how to work through non-institutional new institutions, meaning can we have a platform where we do not need to depend on the deans and everybody, funding and all these things, to learn something, to share something. And I am honored today. We all are honored today because you found it home to share with us your long-term research. I can only imagine how much you must have spent time and energies to find all of these things that I am only partly familiar with. And I'm from there, and not just from there, deeply interested in these things. And so that to me is a depth of your research. That just is epitome of researching on this particular tradition, particular lineage. We have lost so much and we have gained so much. And Dr. Harris, you are not just a historian in the Indological sense that has nothing to do with lived aspect of culture. As I hear from you, that you are also deeply interested in living and practicing these things. And and so this is what Vimarsha is also for. We are not trying to create a school only for people doing sadhana, but we want to have this school that is always faithful to a rational inquiry, a fair conversation, a dialogue, particularly within dharma traditions, and in a global context. I was too quick when we started Let's Have Vimarsha Academia. I wanted to have something as focused as like Mind and Life Institute of Dalai Lama. And soon I realized that we need to build the entire body of scholars to start having that level of conversation. And but I am not there to give up, and I got helping hands from Dr. Anna Fones, Elisa Widition in the beginning, like a whole year, and now they are in sabbatical, or they are like doing their own tenure files. But when they are busy, I'm happy that Dr. Professor Ravi Kudesia and Dr. Danilo Costa Lima and many other friends and students have picked that pace and not let these two die away. You know, whoever has worked in Vimarsha Academia, that I have not even the slightest control. I do not want to have even a slightest control to the narratives. An absolute academic freedom to completely disagree with anybody, including myself. And if we do not create a platform with that absolute freedom, we are not serious about academic platform. And I mean it. And so I hope you feel Vimarsha as your home. Bring more scholars to share their journey with us. And you know, today, as occupational scholars, we go to look for fund. You know, I have this idea, and then I'm applying for a grant. And even among my own brothers, you know, I don't get the grant, and then I give up the project.
Mhm.
We are not creating that bunch of loiters in Vimarsha. We are, you know, your jata is an indication of willingness to go to be a vagrant. I'm sorry to say that way, that if we are in India, it is what it means. You know that, right? So all the siddhas, not a single siddha got any grant. I don't think so. And they kept doing what they loved to do, and they kept sharing what they knew, and then they shaped civilization. They remade civilization in their image. The Hindu society before and after Siddhas did not remain the same. Forget about Hindu society. Buddhism didn't remain the same in entirety. The biggest difference before and after Siddhas is like in a huge change. And who brought about these changes? These ascetic hermits who selflessly honed their insight and shared their knowledge. I know we live in a very different society, but we are still the same human being with the same pulsating heart, and these insights we need to distribute throughout the globe. And in the back of my mind, yes, there is still this little sinister thought that in our times we need institutions, unlike in Saraha's time. But that is possible when we create a movement, and some among you, the audience, one among you from this group, realizes the value of these dialogues, and then help us create the needed institution that will facilitate an ongoing involvement and engagement and a dialogue with the scholars in the global picture. And that is only possible when we keep the flame going. Thank you, Westin, for keeping the flame going. Thank you, Ravi, for facilitating the flame to continue. And I thank you all for being part of this family. Without you, there is no Vimarsha. You know that. Vimarsha is not a temple, maybe not a school, but what Vimarsha is a movement. Movements create millions of schools when time comes. Our job is to create the climate. And we will ourselves also become a school, but there is no copyrights for the ideas. You know, there is the whole thing is this has to catch up as a movement. And we have to take knowledge from, yes, I am also from an elite college institution. 99% of the people in the world cannot come and learn in my school. It is too expensive. 99.9 maybe % of the humanity cannot dream of getting education where I am teaching. Counterintuitively, can we make education so easy to access that 99.9% can get that for free if they wanted? Because at the end of the day, you know, you have a diploma in humanities, you have a likely chance of getting a job. You don't have any diploma in humanities, you have also likely chance of getting a job. So diploma in humanities is not as crucial as knowledge that we provide through the humanities. And this knowledge, we can make it global, but I cannot do it alone. I need your help. Everybody here. I know Dr. Neela Saxena is here. I need all of you to help on this. I don't have complete vision. I'm not coming a guru. I'm just a teacher like any of you. And I just feel like this is not okay. You know, this type of education model is not working. But I don't know what we can do about it. So I appreciate your help. I know all of you, how busy you are in wherever you are in your walk of life. But you have chosen to give your time to whatever the whims we are sharing together. That's what makes family, Let's go and do this thing, and nobody questions, why do you go there? We just go because it's fun to walk together. It's a journey, my friends. That's what matters. It's having a journey together. And, that's where we share more than knowledge, our love for each other. And I thank you all. I don't want to take too much of your time. You have already given so much. I thank you all again and again. Om Namah Shivaya.
Thank you, Acharya ji. It's an absolute honor and a pleasure. And I would just like to say to everybody, I'd love to continue this conversation. So whether it's through Vimarsha, you can also reach out to me over email. In the spirit of Acharyaji's very wise words, I am committed to open source and to making this information freely available as much as possible. So I try not to remain in the proverbial ivory towers, as it were. I do welcome emails, so you can find my information online and on social media, anywhere. Please feel free to reach out. I would love to continue these conversations very much in the spirit of Acharya-ji's broader project here. So thank you, Acharya-ji. Thank you, Ravi-ji. Thank you, Danilo-ji. Thank you to the Vimarsha Foundation. And thank you to all of you for putting up with my blah, blah, blah.